So I was here last year, and I just want to congratulate the team on the magnificence of this year's conference. I think I'm probably speak for a few people who maybe have been coming regularly to see that there really is something extraordinary what's happening this year. The lineup, the turnout, the quality of the people who are here. So I'm absolutely delighted to be here. It was worth the 35 hours of flying. It's always worth the 35 hours of flying. I also want to thank FACN for giving me the platform to have the conversation I'm going to have today. Last year when I was here, I spoke about genes and SNPs and enzymes and pathways, and that's always fun. But this year, they gave me a topic and they didn't tell me what I had to do with it, and I really appreciated that. Because a great deal has changed for me, especially in the last year, and I even think a great deal has changed for the field of nutrigenomics in the last year. And so I'm going to use this platform to have an interesting conversation. So the topic I was given is translating the science of nutrigenomics into practice, and that really is my field, being a clinician first and then academic afterwards, this concept of translational nutrigenomics. My disclosure, the two companies I'm currently involved in are 3x4 Genetics and Manuka Science, which is an education company. My learning objectives is really to understand what is happening in the testing market at the moment, what are the challenges that we're facing as practitioners, and then what would a solution look like? So by the end of it, I'd like you to all understand what a solution could be, what does it look like, and how does knowledge and education play a role in that process? Now that I've got that out of the way, because you have to put those slides in, you're told they've got to go in, I'm actually changing the topic of my conversation. So actually, this is my title slide, and it's doing things better. So let's start again. This is my challenge to all of you. I truly believe that as practitioners, we have not fulfilled our potential in the nutrigenomics space. Mostly, I actually feel like we failed, and I put up my hand as kind of the front of the queue. So I asked the question, what can we do better? Let's start with what's going on in the marketplace, because you'd have to be living under a rock to not be aware of what's been happening, even if you live at the bottom of Africa. I have put 3 companies on this slide, only because I was told that I couldn't have 10 slides just with direct-to-consumer genetic testing companies. Literally. I heard at a conference I was at yesterday that there are 400 direct-to-consumer genetic tests in the marketplace. 400. And probably half of them have arisen in the last couple of years. So these just are a few of the ones that we know about most. So 23andMe, almost you can kind of read about in the news every single day. I could spend the entire hour giving you my opinion about each company. I'll refrain from that. But these are the companies, particularly the first 2, that are really impacting the direct-to-consumer genetic market. So 23andMe, who've been offering consumer gene tests for many, many years. It changes, the genes change, the report changes. We now have Ancestry and Health, but we know they've reached about 5 million people. We know they just did a deal with Glaxo, $300 million, to be able to start building these kind of designer drugs based on genomics. Second one is Helix, and I hope no one here representing Helix. A company that is a spin-off of Illumina. We call Illumina like the Microsoft of genetic testing. And Helix really was an incredibly exciting company when I first came across them, because the first thing they did, which was quite extraordinary, is they were able to offer what they call Exome Plus, exome sequence genetic testing, plus a whole lot of other gene variants for $79. So, I don't know if you're aware of the concept of Moore's Law, where as technology improves, things get cheaper. So we were really seeing the most amazing manifestation of that by Helix, $79 for a whole lot of data. And then they would build a platform that you would buy genetic tests as you went along and kind of build up a portfolio of tests. Unfortunately, it hasn't panned out as we'd hoped. I suspect that the majority of their testing is still ancestral, National Geographic, and the rest of them are what I call the rats and mice, where, I know, very harsh, but true. If you have a look at the Helix platform, I think they've done a great disservice to our field and to the field of nutrigenomics and to the value of the science that drives our testing. Habit's just one of the newer ones on the marketplace, a very complicated product. It's got genetics in. It's very hard to see exactly what they are. It has a milkshake that made me feel extremely ill. Still don't know what kind of information I'm going to get from it, and magnificent packaging. So there's a lot of companies like Habit in the precision medicine, personalized medicine space. We will wait and see what happens with them. So I haven't listed the other 397 consumer genetic testing, but I'm sure you're seeing them all the time. And included in that are the companies where you take your 23andMe data and you upload it to a website and you get either methylation printout or, if you're very lucky, methylation and detoxification as well. So I would say they're in there. This is just a slide to give you some idea of just how incredible the growth has been in the consumer genetic testing environment. So on the left-hand side, which is your right-hand side, it talks about the number of people that have been tested. The total amount is total genetic testing, but the dark purple is ancestry DNA. Ancestry DNA by itself is about 2/3 of all the consumer genetic tests that have ever been done. And if you add 23andMe on top of that, they really kind of have captured the market in a significant way. Everyone debates the numbers, but we know Ancestry is probably close to about somewhere around 8 to 10 million that people have tested. On the right-hand side, we're talking in dollars, how much is the value of the marketplace, and you can see why we're getting this proliferation of consumer genetic tests when you can see how much is being spent, the dollar spend in the space. And for 2020, we're looking at $340 million a year of spend. That's a lot. Here's the saddest slide of my entire presentation. Literally. It's horrible. So in 2000, I joined my first nutrigenomics startup called Siona, first in the UK. They got beaten up in the UK, so we moved to Boulder, Colorado, and started working there. We produced our first nutrigenomic test report, probably earlier than 2003. Definitely by 2003, it was up and about. I'm sure you realize the significance of 2003. That was the year that we saw the draft of the human genome. We were already selling a nutrigenomic test in 2003 and had been for a couple of years. The report that you can see on the left-hand side of your screen is what we generated in 2003. The report on the right-hand side, and it doesn't matter what company I chose, literally. Think of any genomic company that you have interacted with, be it direct-to-consumer or practitioner-based. That's what it looks like. Nothing has happened in 15 years. Seriously. I'll tell you what has happened. We added more SNPs in. So every year, we add more SNPs in. So I think in my first report, it was 13. Now we're looking at anything between 40 and 5,000. But we just kept on adding SNPs in. Our tables got bigger. Our PDFs looked prettier. We had better images. We could send them faster. But really, 15 years? And this is what we're working with as practitioners? So I want to keep in mind this idea of value. Value to our patients, value to the clients, value to the consumer, and very importantly, value to the practitioner. So before I move on to my next slide, who in this audience are actually practicing clinicians? So it's a fair majority, probably a slight majority. I'm really excited about that. So this is a challenge to us. And remember that I've been involved in that 15 years. So I take a huge amount of responsibility for the fact that our field has not evolved. And why has direct-to-consumer captured this market? Whose fault is it? Whose fault is it that we have allowed the DTC market to own the space of nutrigenomics? What has happened? what is the result of this? The first thing is we have completely undermined the value of nutrigenomic tests and nutrigenomic data. When we spend $300 or $400 of our clients' money and we're using reports that are available in the marketplace, are we giving them value, or are we actually wasting their money? How is nutrigenomics as a whole being viewed in terms of value? Value of science, value of content, and impact in behavior. Second one is we have impacted the quality of care given either directly to the consumer or through the practitioner by not creating a better solution for nutrigenomics. And I believe part of that, we have downgraded the expertise being offered. Because these nutrigenomic reports are so widely available, they are being used by practitioners who are not qualified to be able to use them. And that may seem harsh, but I do understand I am preaching to the converted in this room. But imagine if I was at Fancy or one of the really big conferences, how many in the audience would know how to be able to use this data? So I asked the question, what are we doing wrong? How can we do it better? And I'm not just going to kind of beat us all up. I'm going to try actually talk about how do we fix it. So to do that, I'm going to tell you about my story. When I initially crafted my presentation, which they make you do this months before you actually appear here, I took it to a friend of mine who's a wonderful speaker, and I always run my presentations through him, and he goes, seriously? Like, it's a theoretical idea? You've done all this, right? You've done it, and you've got the scars to show. Just tell them your story. So here I am telling my story. So I live in Cape Town, South Africa. For those of you who don't know where that is or how beautiful it is, I have my little photo. And the great thing about being based in Cape Town, South Africa, is I've been able to really curate and test quite a complex solution in a smaller population than what is kind of available in the United States. So it really has given me quite a unique opportunity. From 2000 to 2013, my entire career was focused around building nutrigenomic tests. All those, Siona, the first one, went direct to consumer, mistake number one. They closed their doors after 9 years. And they were very early, granted. But all my other work has been in building tests for the practitioner market. When I got to 2013, I was done. I was disillusioned. I was disappointed. I was frustrated. I was like, this is not good enough. This just isn't good enough. I don't believe that we're really making a change. I don't think we're having an impact. So I kind of ducked out of genetic test development. And what I really wanted to do was to look at the education, because it didn't matter what I was doing in the test. If there wasn't a practitioner who knew how to use the information effectively, the point was moot. So I focused my attention on education. And I then spent 2 years building a practitioner-based translational nutrigenomics education course. Also started teaching a course for Rutgers, and I built one for a local South African university as well. And this was extraordinary to me, because the best thing about it was I realized how desperate practitioners were for clinical translation, but also I realized what was so exciting about what we were teaching is that was for the first time in my career, which already had been 13 years, I understood that there was a difference between nutrigenetics and nutrigenomics. So before I go on, because I'll bring it up again later, nutrigenetics is gene variants, SNPs. We have a gene variant. Hopefully it has an impact in some way. It changes biochemistry. It does something that we can measure. It's functional. But really, it's baseline data. Doesn't actually tell us what's really going on in the body. It's not a biomarker, but it is information. But what was so incredibly exciting for me was the concept of nutrigenomics, which has already been spoken about a great deal today, just maybe not in my terms, which is how do we use nutrition to change gene expression? And Deanna spoke, well, basically the entire presentation was about nutrigenomics. How nutrients, either as cofactors or more directly, like sulforaphane on the glutathione transferases, can upregulate or downregulate. And then I realized, I mean, I'd always kind of known that my profession as dietetics had been a failure. I've said it before, I'll say it again. Dietetics as a profession has not succeeded. We need to do better. I am a dietitian. We need to do better. And one of the reasons is because we were missing such a fundamental part of understanding nutrition, which is nutrients change gene expression. And I'll talk a little bit about my clinic in South Africa and how we believe we practice a very different kind of nutrition. And also, I was extremely lucky that in the early 2000s, I was introduced to the Institute of Functional Medicine, really early 2000s in the beginning, and have spent the last 15, 18 years attending functional medicine, which of course completely changed the paradigm of how I view nutrition. So taking my training in functional medicine with my understanding of this nutrigenomic relationship has really molded my philosophy around nutrigenomics. Okay. I then realized that it wasn't good enough to just teach. I needed to practice. And I was one of those dietitians who did like 2 years when I first graduated and never saw a patient ever again. And my colleagues always joke that I really don't like patients. I like practitioners. But I decided that if I really wanted to understand whether what I was teaching actually worked in clinical practice, the only way to do that was actually to see patients. And so I opened a clinic in Cape Town 3 years ago, just over 3 years ago. We called it the Center for Translational Genomics, and that's what I wanted it to be. I wanted it to be a place where the practitioners who work there would really deeply understand the expertise of nutrigenomics. We would practice a functional nutrition, functional medicine, nutrigenetics, and nutrigenomics. And it was a very small clinic. I had 3 doctor and 3 dietitian colleagues who had to go through lots of mentorship and training, and it was extremely successful. We never did any advertising. We had a lot of people coming, but for me, the real learning curve was, how is what I'm teaching in my courses translating to my patients? So that was a good couple of years, but I got to the end of that, and I still felt like I really hadn't figured it out. So we were doing some nice work in the clinic. The education was going really well, but I just felt like there was just something missing, that the impact of really driving change in nutrigenomics, in upskilling and creating expert practitioners wasn't happening. I was really not happy. So I realized I actually had to take it further. And so for the last couple of years, I've been working on what I call a complete solution, trying to work out if we're going to tackle this direct-to-consumer onslaught, if we're going to reclaim nutrigenomics for the value it can offer to our clients and our patients, we need a better solution. This is what my complete solution looks like, and I'm going to take you through each detail. At the bottom, kind of holding it, is a test, a genetic test, and we'll talk a little bit about what my vision is about what a nutrigenomic test should actually be, a nutrigenetic test more accurately. The next level is to talk about a network of practitioners. Then we're going to talk about what education do we need, and then holding it all together at the top is a mentorship program. And I'm going to take you through each of these, and I'm using obviously my journey and what I've done. So I started building the solution a couple of years back, but really I would say the most amount of my work has been done since my the last ACN conference and this one. The timing's really good. So let's talk about the test. I've got one slide. I could have 20. So what I did when I sat down and I said, okay, I want to build a complete solution. What test am I going to use? And I was, by then, very, very familiar with all the nutrigenomic tests and nutrigenetic tests in the marketplace. And I sat down and I said, what is wrong with them that I'm not happy with? Which by then I was kind of fairly sure I knew what is wrong with them. But I didn't necessarily have a good idea how to fix it. So I'm going to talk about 4 different concepts that I believe we've been doing wrong for the last 18 years. Okay. The first one is SNP-based recommendations. And the great thing is I get to speak after some brilliant speakers today who've just laid the most amazing foundation for everything that I'm going to say. So thank you for that. So the first thing is, these gene variants are low penetrance. They really are. They're just not that powerful. And one of the things that's happened in the last couple of decades is that we are overreaching the science. Now, this is coming from me, who built a career on nutrigenomics, and I'm telling you, it's just not that powerful. We cannot make the claims on gene variants that we have been making unless they're a high penetrance gene variant. But let's face it, the ones we're talking about, the ones we're seeing, they're not. Okay. So I never want to see SNP-based recommendations. We have lived through this terrible era of MTHFR, right? Okay. So we do not want to see companies called MTHFR thinking that, or patients getting advice on everything from supplements and lifestyle and environment and nutraceuticals based on a single SNP. I'm not saying that 677CT is not clinically useful. It totally is. But it's a low penetrance gene variant that sits amongst a whole lot of other variants, that sits in a whole couple of pathways. So we really saw the darkest time in nutrigenomics in the last 10 years. And MTHFR kind of led the game because it was that SNP, and because we had so much literature on it. But it doesn't matter. It's any of the SNPs. We should not be giving SNP-based gene recommendations. Okay. SNPs work in pathways, right? We have a whole lot of SNPs that each in their own way are contributing something, impacting biochemistry in some way, but they're part of a pathway. So that comes to my next conversation, is that we need to go upstream. So this is my training in functional medicine, all right? So dietetics medicine was built on downstream medicine, downstream nutrition. We start with disease, you start with cardiovascular disease or diabetes. I'm sure you're all very aware of this. We put plasters on it with pharmaceuticals. But sometimes we even put plasters with nutraceuticals. We have to go upstream. What does upstream mean? We're going up to the level of cellular function. We start at cellular function, we work our way downstream. When we're sitting in cellular function, inflammation, detoxification, oxidative stress, methylation, we are talking about biochemical pathways, metabolic pathways, either. What are the gene and the gene variants that are sitting in those pathways that have a functional impact on the biochemistry of those pathways? So I have a completely different approach to selecting my SNPs. I believe traditionally, and my first more than half of my career, when I was choosing gene variants to build genetic tests, I based it on something called scientific validity. It needed there to be scientific research, there needed to be enough, a sample, the N size needed to be big enough, the stats needed to be good enough, there needed to be a replicated study, all the traditional kind of scientific research. And if I ticked all those boxes, I was like, great gene variant, put it in the test. My learning from the last half a decade has been something completely different. I see scientific validity as a baseline, a prerequisite. I haven't thrown it out, but it really doesn't actually give me what I'm looking for. And what I'm looking for is clinical validity, clinical usefulness. That's what I'm really interested in. So for the first part of my career, I would look for studies that were based on associations and interactions. And I have like slides I built like 10 years ago that I'm completely ashamed of now. Because I said, if there's an association study between this gene variant and that disease, that's good enough, and I'm putting it in the test. Well, based on that, we will have tests with 300 and 400 and 1,000 gene variants. Not at all clinically useful. So I went back and I said, well, I don't want to look at associations. I want to understand what these gene variants are actually doing. So I built a completely separate criteria that says, does this gene variant impact biochemistry? That was the only real thing that I was interested in. So I've been looking for the functional gene variants, the ones that change biochemistry, and then understanding how they fit in the pathway, and then will they change something about what I do with my patient in clinical practice? Because if they don't, they shouldn't be in the test. So I have just got crazier and crazier about what doesn't go in the test. And I'll tell you the other problem. When we build genetic tests with hundreds and hundreds of gene variants, all we do is create noise. And we decrease the value of the gene variants that are functional and do affect biochemistry and do have value to our patients. So it's always the opposite. The bigger the test, the more red flags. Because all we're doing is get noise. We don't know what to do with the data. We don't know how to interpret it, and it's not clinically useful. The other thing I wanted to change is I never want to see tables in a genetic test. I am tired of PDF tables. Really, gene variant, genotype, you can have stars or bubbles or ticks or flashing lights or colors, and then a recommendation. 18 years, and we have not been able to do better than that. So I don't want to do that anymore. Because I know that what my patients really want is something they can understand, something they can engage with, something they can interact with. So what do we do with our patients? The benefit of having forced me to see patients for a year is I landed up drawing pictures to try and explain what methylation is, to explain what detox is, to explain how inflammation affects everything. So I was like, well, actually, if I'm drawing pictures all the time, why don't I actually just create a report based on pictures? So I don't do tables anymore. I do pictures. I don't do SNP-based recommendations anymore. I do pathway-based recommendations. I don't talk about disease. I talk about cellular function and pathways. And I not only look at nutrigenetics, the gene variants, but the recommendations that we give are based on nutrigenomics. How do we change gene expression to improve the health of our patients? Okay, I will finally move off that slide. This is about almost a year ago, we rebranded and upgraded our clinic. The clinic is by far the hardest work, as you all know who have your own clinics, and takes way too much of my time, but it has been absolutely precious and give us insights on how do you use nutrigenetics in clinical practice. We just learn and learn from our patients all the time. And when we're not getting through, we think, what other tool do we need? What other education do we need? What don't we know? How do we integrate it differently? And this is my team. That's my new clinic. Anyone who comes to Cape Town, please come visit. You're all welcome. I have an amazing team who've been with me now for a couple of years. I have some amazing practitioners who have been studying nutrigenomics now for years. They have been studying functional medicine. Kathy Swift and Sheila Dean's program, IFNA, is available in South Africa. It's absolutely fantastic. And we're really building this extraordinary group, and I'm going to talk about my extraordinary group. So then I realized it wasn't good enough just to have your own clinic. So I have a clinic in in a very nice suburb, but one suburb in Cape Town, no impact. And of course, I'm after impact. So once we kind of got that, I was like, now what do I do? Because now we're just sitting around talking to each other. So I was like, well, that's great, but I really need to communicate more. So we started building a network. And actually, I started this 3 years ago in a very small way in Cape Town. Now we have a national network where I was like, there are like-minded people all around the country who are trying really hard to practice better nutrition and better medicine. They are working in isolation, they are lonely, they are confused, and they don't know who to work with. And they also don't know where to go for education. So I built a very small network in Cape Town. Initially, my network was only 13 people. But the great thing about it is it's multidisciplinary. I have a chiropractor, I have a dentist, a physio, doctors, specialists, psychiatrists, lots of dietitians, nutritionists, nutritional therapists. And suddenly, we had a community who could all talk to each other and have a conversation using the same language. And of course, they could cross-refer to each other and work together. So we started the network very small. We started with 13. I now have 120. which are across the country, of extraordinary practitioners, but we actually make it really hard for them. So it's not like, first of all, you've got to be invited. So we only like the good practitioners. And the second thing, no, it's important that we keep the quality. And the second thing is we make them jump through a whole lot of hoops, and I'll tell you what those hoops are. But we have a whole lot of opportunities that happen when you join our network. So you have access to our workshops, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about those workshops, as well as our education, continuing education. It used to be you had access to me. We try now not do that so much, otherwise I'll never get any work done. But I have an amazing team now, and I'll show you how we play it out. We have an extraordinarily active WhatsApp. Not everyone in the States uses WhatsApp. It's really huge in South Africa, brilliant communication tool. We run networks by geography. So we have 3 geographical networks. They each have about 30, 40, 50 practitioners that are on it. And it's an amazing communication tool to ask questions, connect with other practitioners, connect with us. Obviously, while I'm here at conferences like this, I'm sending photos back and bringing attention to them. They're all sitting there, they're hearing about it, they're communicating with each other. It's been an extremely successful cross-communication platform for our practitioners. And one will say, I'm looking for an endocrinologist, or I'm looking for a gynecologist. Do you know a functional gynecologist in South Africa? And I'm saying, well, there's actually one. We'd like some more, but we only have one. So that's been one of the great successes of our network. This is what we made them do, though. So how do we make them jump through loops? We said, if you want to be in our network, and if you want to work the test that I've built, you need to do a course. Not just any course. You need to do a tough course, okay? Not a one-day workshop course, because that's easy. So I have 2 courses that had been running in a separate company for the last 3-4 years. I have a short version, which some people say is really hard. I think it's really easy. And I have like a super hard one. Is there anyone in the room who's doing my Manuka one, my super hard one? Fantastic. Is it hard? Yes, it is, truthfully. Okay. Anyone in the room doing my foundations course, 4-module course? No one chose the easy one. Okay. So we said at least you need to have a foundational course. Otherwise, you cannot work with us, and you cannot work with my test. This is my way of ensuring that the patient at the end gets value for the test that I'm offering. It's the only way I can do it, because I'm outsourcing my expertise. So I want to make sure that the conversation that's happening in the consulting room has value to the client and to the patient. So we make them do a course. We make them attend continuing education workshops, which we make so amazing that hopefully they don't feel like it's a burden at all. And there's something else which happens, which I'm going to tell you about. So this is the what I call the theoretical education, in the sense that it's a course, it's online, you have to take it, you have to work through it, and you have to pass it, okay? But a large part of what we do is continuing education. So there's 3 versions. There's one is the workshops I give, and then I'll tell you a little bit about each of them. We have webinars, which we've just initiated now, and we have partnerships. So continuing education, because the field is so dynamic, because it's changing all the time, because of the contrast, we really feel that like literally every 2 months we run a workshop, and every workshop has a different theme. It's hormone balance, one will be cognitive, the next one, it'll be, except you get the idea. Okay. This is one that I recently gave, which was an amazing one. It was on a cognitive function. And what we've learned and what we do now is, in the beginning, it was just me, get bored of listening to me speak. And so I've started building these extraordinary partnerships with practitioners in South Africa who really are experts in their field. So, they usually have they're the ones that have got like 3 months to get to see them as a practitioner. They're all practitioners, they're all clinicians. I do the genomics side, and they do the clinical side. And so I'll get the best doctor working in cognitive function to speak with me, the best doctor working in estrogen, and they're usually an MD, whereas I am the more RD. And these partnerships have been incredibly powerful in terms of increasing our knowledge base, reaching out, and bringing the translational clinical application into what we're doing. This is just an example of some of the workshops. You can see there's a whole bunch of them. Unfortunately, we don't have photos of other people speaking, but there are other people speaking. But really, we also, once every 2 years, do a symposium. So a whole day symposium, we bring out international speakers, and we also have a consumer day version, which was incredibly successful. This is a webinar. We just started this, where we realized that we could only do so much education once every couple of months. They're very big, they're very unwieldy. We have to move our team around the country. South Africa's quite big. So we started doing webinar education. So we run a 4-week program. It's literally 45 minutes on a Friday. It's very translational, lots of case studies, lots of application. You just dial in through Facebook, and it's been incredibly successful. This is my second last slide. I knew I was going to have lots of extra time. I don't know if they'll let me maybe take questions, but let me just talk about this. So what I realized is I wanted to build this concept of community of practice, and I don't know if you're aware of this. So initially when I started out, I was always standing on the stage and teaching, and I realized that that wasn't going to get us anywhere. What we really wanted to do was to build a community. And community of practice is a concept that actually works from the bottom up, not the top down. So what I'm looking to do, and this is really my ultimate vision, is to build a global group of expert practitioners in nutrigenomics. Global experts. And to do that, we need to start from the bottom and build up. And we do that by continuing education, we do that by education, we do that by engagement, we do that by writing and social media. But more important, we take those that are interested in the community and we raise them up by saying, do you want to co-author an article with me? Do you want to do some research with me? Do you want to help me build the next version of the genetic test? So that they don't just sit and listen, but they start engaging. And by doing that, they raise up the whole field. And we have an extraordinary group of practitioners in South Africa now who are just getting smarter and better clinicians, more impactful with their behavior, changing behavior in their practice, and really moving them to health. And one of the key things that we initiated is a mentorship program. Because we can't have impact if we don't have mentorship. And I know that FACN has been extremely successful in initiating a mentorship program to be able to use those who've been in the field for a long time to raise up the level of those who are new, to hold their hand. It can be overwhelming, can be intimidating. Genetics is definitely both of those things. So how do we raise them up? So I'm very lucky that because I have surrounded myself by extraordinary practitioners for quite some time. I have practitioners who did my courses years ago, who have been working with me. We've been working in the clinic for many years, and they have now moved into a full-time mentorship space. And literally 8 hours a day, all they do is mentor other practitioners. So what we're trying to take away is that gap, that obstacle that says, I'm overwhelmed by nutrigenomics. I want to add value to my patient. I want to do the best that I can do. I don't know how to evaluate a test. I don't know where to start. But most importantly, how do I take this genetic information and integrate it into everything else that I'm doing with my patients? Remember, nutrigenetics is baseline data. That's all it is. It's beautiful, it's insightful, it's valuable, it's informative, but it's baseline data. And it has to be integrated into the context of everything all of you are doing in your clinical practice to have any impact. We mustn't overreach the science. We mustn't make claims that we can't substantiate. But it's a beautiful tool to use when we're trying to be the best practitioners that we can be to impact behavioral change. So just to conclude, we need to provide genetic results in context. We need to base our knowledge on evidence-based learning, and we need to always apply clinical translation. We need to ensure that the best value is extracted from nutrigenetic tests in an ethical and a responsible manner. We can do better.